Good morning, councillors. Good morning, executive team. Good morning to those joining us in the digital gallery this morning for the ordinary meeting of the 8th of June 2021. It's my privilege to declare the meeting open, and in doing so I would again acknowledge the traditional owners, the land on which we meet and also across which the Scenic Rim is formed, and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging, and congratulate them on their ongoing nurture of their culture as a living culture. I note a full attendance of councillors and executive. And councillors, as we move forward to item 4, prayers, I note that we don't have a member of the clergy with us this morning, so please bear with me as we just briefly consider Proverbs 4 verses 6 and 7, which tells us, "Do not forsake wisdom, and she'll protect you. Love her, and she'll watch over you. Wisdom is supreme, therefore get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding." As we move to contemplate the matters for Scenic Rim collectively today, let us bear that in mind. Let's pause for a moment of prayer. Father, you are indeed a gracious God. You bless us with a rich land, with a rich community of character, and a wonderful place that shows forth your wonderful bounty. As we come together as the elected leadership of this community today and deliberate, Lord, let us be mindful that we are called to exercise wisdom on behalf of the collective community, to put aside our personal agendas and to focus on bringing understanding and wisdom to our considerations on behalf of the residents of Scenic Rim. We ask that you will guide us in this at every step today. In Jesus' name, amen. Come to item 5, councillors, the declarations of prescribed or declarable conflicts. I believe Councillor West, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. Something's happened to my microphone lead. Close enough to it. Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'd like to inform the meeting that I have a prescribed conflict of interest, excuse me, to item 10.2, which is the Regional Arts Development Fund, round 2, 2020 to 2021. This prescribed conflict of interest arises because I'm a board member of Tembury Mountain College, which is a recommended recipient of the RADF funding. As a result of my conflict of interest, I do intend to leave the meeting room while the matter is considered and voted upon. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. So noted, and we will deal with that as we come to that matter. Are there any other declarations? Not. I note we have no announcements or mayoral minutes before us today, and we have no deputations arranged or presentations of petitions. We move to item 8, which relates to the confirmation of the minutes of the previous meeting. Councillors, you've all had access to those, and the recommendation before us is that the minutes of the ordinary meeting held on the 25th of May 2021 be adopted. I seek a mover. Councillor McGuinness, are there any questions to this matter? Any questions, clarifications to the minutes? Not, a seek a seconder. Councillor McConnell, any desire to speak? Councillor McGuinness, anyone else wishing to speak? Not, we put the motion for the adoption of the minutes. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move, there is no business before the meeting today arising from those minutes. So we move to item 10, which is dealing with the business of the meeting today. And we move first to item 10.1. GM, Customer and Regional Prosperity, would you kindly introduce this item? Page 4 of your agendas, councillor.
Thank you, Mayor, Councillors, Executive and those listening. 10.1 is the Royal Commission into the National Natural Disaster Arrangements final report. I have with me today Officers Alyssa Tottenhofer and Deborah Moore, and Alyssa is going to provide a brief overview of the report, noting that councillors will have read the information, but happy to draw out a few highlights. Thanks, Alyssa.
Good morning. So the following report was written just to outline following up our submission to the Royal Commission and the natural disaster arrangements from the 19th of June 2020. So from the Royal Commission, they outlined their terms of reference. There was the inquiry of the report with 24 chapters. There were over 80 recommendations listed. So the recommendations have been addressed internally with our Disaster Management Steering Committee and have been discussed at our LDMG. So there's a few examples there listed. So we have essential services, emergency planning, evacuation planning for shelters, and evacuation planning routes. So the recommendations will form part of a working group. Again, in our disaster management events recommendations and actions register. The register will include the recommendations from IGEM, also internal, internal briefings from events to inform our LDMG and our Scenic and Regional Council strategic responsibilities.
And I might just explain that IGEM is the Queensland Inspector General of Emergency Management, and LDMG is our local disaster management group for those who don't have a copy of a report in front of them. So, Mayor, the rest of the report is reasonably self-explanatory, and we have a couple of recommendations there this morning for consideration.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions for clarification to the report? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question regarding the outcomes from the Royal Commission, and has the Royal Commission provided value, benefit and perhaps opportunity for our LDMG to provide greater capacity and capability in dealing with future natural disasters?
Nothing like a small question, Councillor.
You'll have to excuse my nerves, but not as yet. I wanted to capture these recommendations for us to be a bit more proactive and list on how we can monitor these recommendations, and if they do come down to local government area for Queensland.
Other question? Councillor, continue.
And following up from that, and thank you for that, Alyssa, have there been any additional resources provided to implement the recommendations of the Royal Commission?
Thanks, Councillor. No, there's been no additional resources to implement any of these. We've actually got quite a number of recommendations from other inquiries on our list as well. And we just are slowly going through them and looking at what we have done and where we're going with them.
I might also add to that, Councillor, in addition to working through this in the Disaster Management Steering Committee setting, and as Alyssa has always also alluded to through the local disaster management group, we've also had a discussion in our risk reference group and are working with our internal auditor to look at how we track all of these recommendations across all the different studies and debriefs that happen after each natural disaster. And we've got many years of those reports that we're digesting and working through systematically to ensure that we are building resilience, capacity and capability across the region.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor West?
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I was just wondering, we have 3 officers who have been funded by bushfire funding, who come for short periods of time. Are they going to be doing some of this work? I understood perhaps with evacuation details that they may be involved.
So we've actually only got 2 funded officers at the moment. One's recovery and resilience, and that's around the bushfires for 2019-2020. The other one is a project officer that's actually working on some sub-plans and on the community disaster volunteers, and they are discrete projects. The project officer finishes in December, and our resilience and recovery officer finishes in June 2022.
Perhaps the third officer you're thinking about, Councillor, is the drought resilience officer that is currently being recruited from a recovery perspective.
I was thinking of the bushfire resilience. Are there not 3? Bushfire resilience officer as well?
Oh, there is a yes, there is a bushfire resilience officer, and again, that's very project driven, and we had to submit their work plan as part of the application.
Any other questions, councillors? If not, are there any comments that can add additional clarity to the report? Not, GM, I'd ask you to introduce the recommendations for this report.
Thank you, Mayor. Before presenting the recommendation, I'd just like to point out a change that was made to recommendation 2. Unfortunately, it appears not to have saved properly in our documentation.
It's right on here.
It's in the agenda, Mayor. It's in. So it's correct in the minutes, but not in the. So the second recommendation, we wanted the wording to say Council acknowledge and delete the words are aware of and note for consistency. So with that change, I'll read the recommendation that 1, Council acknowledge the final report and recommendation of the Royal Commission into National Natural Disaster Arrangements final report that are relevant to Queensland local government organisations, and 2, the Council acknowledge the recommendations made to other governments and organisations, options for Local Government Association of Queensland discussions, and continuing discussion with state governments and relevant organisations.
Councillor, we have a recommendation in 2 parts. I seek a mover. Councillor McConnell, are there any additional questions to this matter? Not, then I seek a seconder. Councillor West. Any additional discussion, councillors? Not, I'll ask Councillor McConnell, would you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is a good starting point, not only for the Queensland government, but also Australian government to better coordinate response and coordination to the myriad of natural disasters that have come around in the last 10 to 15 years. I look forward to seeing some of these recommendations implemented within council, but also hope that state government give us the necessary resources and support to implement as many as we can. Thank you.
Anyone wishing to speak against? Wishing to speak additionally? I will speak additionally. The great concern, very supportive of the recommendation, and similar to Councillor McConnell from an LDMG point of view and from a regional point of view, the great challenge is that the strategic leadership of these issues and the strategic investment of these issues rests outside of council's capability. And the reality is that the challenge is always faced by the local government dealing with their community directly. We've been very fortunate to have great alliances in the face of disasters with the government agencies such as QPS and QFIS in particular. However, to get the proper systemic changes in place does require a commitment from the more senior levels of government. And I note that there have been multiple similar royal commissions in the past that haven't had their recommendations properly implemented, and that includes the proper follow through of investment in some of our local partners such as national parks for the proper management of hazard reduction and access into those corridors, which creates significant risk and burden continuing. So very supportive of the recommendation. I think the very supportive of the learnings and outcomes from the Royal Commission. The great concern is that we are able to collectively progress from here to a meaningful support and change that properly reflects the risks that our region faces. Anyone else wishing to speak additionally? If not, Councillor McConnell, did you wish to close? Okay, and we have motion before us. Those in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 10.2.
Thank you, Mayor and Councillors. Item 10.2 is the Regional Arts Development Fund Round 2 for 2020-2021. Do have officers joining us today. Mark Paddock.
Just before, just for the benefit of the digital gallery, I just note that Councillor West has, as she indicated, left the meeting for the consideration of this matter.
Thank you, Mayor. So officers will be joining us. I think Bronwyn Davies and Mark Paddock, as I mentioned. I'll get started though. This report is for the RADF grant round 2, as I mentioned. It's to advise council of those applications that were made in this round and that have been assessed by the Scenic Arts Reference Group and submitted now today for council's consideration. Before handing to our officers, Mark, who I believe is going to just touch base on the report, I have a query in regards to previous considerations and recommendations section on page 10 of today's report, and the notation there around the ordinary meeting held on 25 May 2020. That relates to the decision of council to appoint councillors to the various committees, organisational boards and the like, and particularly committees of council. That relates to the appointment of Councillor Enright, who's the chair of the Regional Arts Group. And at the time of writing that report, that was the most current resolution. Just wanted to acknowledge that in May of this year, 1 year later, there would be a more recent resolution, which thankfully also appointed Councillor Enright. So I just wanted to answer that query before we move into the bulk of the report. So I will hand over to you, Mark. Welcome. If you could just put out some highlights of the assessments that have and potentially, the number of applications and the like. Thank you.
Good morning, all.
Just, you have to use the microphone because we have a digital gallery.
Okay, cool. We had 11 applications for the RADF for this round. Of those, 8 were shortlisted through to the second stage. We had additional funds this round, as the last round in October, we only recommended one application, and therefore we had $15,000, which was moved forward into this round. So we had a total of about $40,000 this round, which enabled us to recommend all 8 of those applications for funding. The Arts Reference Group met. They went through all of those applications and agreed that all 8 should be recommended for funding. That is Tambourine Mountain College, who are working with young people for their Arts Fest in 2021. The Templin Historical Society wants to incorporate a public artwork at the front of the museum. They have a very strong telecommunications history, a fully working the old substations where you can plug in the phones and call other buildings in this museum space. And so they wanted an artwork at the front to draw attention to that. Sarah Jane Varg, who works on the mountain, she wants to create a green space for artists to work with people with disabilities, people with mental health issues, and mentor young musicians as part of the Artisan Fair. Howard Edmonds and the Opera Eagle's Nest, they received a concept development grant a couple of years ago, and that was very, very successful. They did a tour out west, right out to Chinchilla and further, and the response from those communities, especially around COVID times, was just outstanding. They were so impressed by their performances. So this grant is to remount that. That basically means new costumes, re-looking at the performances and the marketing and promotional material for that performance, and then do another tour out there. They've already got a range of councils out west who've already booked them based on the last performance. The Boondah District Kindergarten are going to work with our local Indigenous Yugapul artists to create a mural and some workshops for the young kids at the kindy. Tobias Hannigan is a young musician up on Beachmont, one of our first rap artists that we've actually funded. He's going to create his first EP of his music. And Clay Pratt and Alistair Richardson are 2 Boondah artists who are making waves in the Queensland music scene at the moment, and they're going to be part of the Wild Mountain Sounds retreat later this year, and then maybe do some performances in the Scenic Rim after that. So they are the sort of the 8 applications that have been recommended for today. Yeah, oh, sorry, Clay Pratt and Alistair both
They're the 2.
doing the same. Yeah, they're both going to the Wild Mountain. Alistair went there last year as a music engineer. Clay Pratt is actually an up-and-coming Queensland musician all over Triple J at the moment. She's had launched her first record, won a Queensland Music Award with that, and so they have been part of the Wild Mountains 2021.
Thank you. Questions, councillors? Questions for clarity? Councillor McGuinness.
Yes, Mayor, I'd just like to ask, Howard Edmonds, does Scenic Rim get some, some press out of that too by being, travelling right out of the area, and it's great to see for Southwest Queensland. I'm not against the idea, but just like to ensure that we are actually getting recognition there in doing that.
Firstly, they've been asked as one of the conditions of this grant is to perform in the Scenic Rim as well. So they've added that to the tour. And yeah, this is a Scenic Rim group that are a highly professional group, are being advertised as coming from this area. So yes, they're definitely still promoting the Scenic Rim when they travel. Oh, yeah, well, so that's part of the conditions of a RADF grant is all their promotional stuff has to have the Scenic Rim and the Arts Queensland logos on it, and all the statements which relate to the funding coming from Scenic Rim Regional Council. That'll be on all their promotional material. That's a condition of all RADF applicants.
Jointly funded through this Scenic Rim Regional Council and the Queensland Government.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you. Any additional clarifying comments, councillors? Not. Introduce the recommendation, please, GM.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation before us today is that Council approve the allocation of grants under the 2020-2021 Scenic Rim Regional Arts Development Fund Grant Round 2 as recommended by the Scenic Rim Arts Reference Group for a total of $40,020 as follows. Tamborine Mountain College for Art Fest 2021 workshops $3,085. Templin District Historical Society Incorporated from Pole to Pylon Public Art, $1,200. Sarah Jane Vague, Green Space at Artisan Ferry, $3,980. Howard Edmonds, Opera Eagle's Nest Remount Tour of Southwest Queensland for $15,995. Boona District Kindergarten Indigenous Art Workshop and Mural for $5,560. Tobias Hannigan for Tobias Beach LP, $6,200. Clay Pratt, Wild Mountain Songs 2021 for $2,000. And Alastair Richardson, Wild Mountain Songs 2020 for $2,000.
Sorry, that's 2021.
Pardon me, 2021. Sorry, I'm a little bit behind.
Thank you. We have a recommendation. I seek a mover. Councillor Enright to move. Any additional questions? Additional discussion? Not. Councillors, I seek a seconder. Councillor McConnell. You wish to speak, Councillor Enright?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I certainly do, and I think a couple of things need to be pointed out in this round of the RADF applications. Firstly, that we have a very diverse range of applicants that have been approved, and that from the youth to history to music mentorships to wellbeing workshops to the established professionals to who also support our local economy but also spread their talents into Southwest Queensland. The Indigenous art is represented, but involving kindergarten students in Boona. Up and coming musicians have been supported, some with, as Mark mentioned, some with the unique sounds in that rap area. Rap's not quite right. Anyway, yep. And also professional developments for our young musicians. And secondly, the diverse spread across the region from Tamborine Mountain College to Templin, to Tamborine Mountain, to Boona, to Beachmont, to Colson. And I think we've got a wide spread of artists throughout our region, and the funds from this RADF round have supported right throughout the region and a wide range of artists and performers, and it's a delight to have been a part of that process.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak additionally? Not. We'll put the motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Councillor McConnell, would you retrieve your colleague? Thank you very much for that, and look forward to watching those things unfold. Thank you, Councillor West, returning to the meeting. That matter's been dealt with successfully, Councillor. We move to item 10.3, councillors, and I invite the GM of Asset and Environmental Sustainability to introduce.
Thank you, Mayor, councillors, executive, officers, and those listening in online. It's a very, very proud moment for me today to actually bring to you the 4 asset management plans that we've had a number of staff working on over a considerable period of time. Those 4 asset management plans include transport, urban drainage, buildings and facilities, parks and open space. Combined, these 4 plans actually cover off on close to $1 billion worth of council's assets. This is a culmination of many years of data and collection and analysing of this data. It is also very appropriate to have these plans in place, not only as a result of legislative requirements, but it also provides strategic direction moving forward on how we manage these assets into the future. I'd like to firstly acknowledge both Wasu Padeshi, our acting Capital Works and Asset Management Manager, and also Alvin Vale, our Coordinator Asset Management, who are here today, who have certainly played an important role in putting these plans together. Within the report, it covers off on a number of aspects of the actual asset management plans, and it was very, I think, intuitive vision of Alvin to actually consider putting together summary documents as well to cover each of those plans, so that in a couple of pages you can actually have a high level view of what's contained within the more detailed document. By no means this is not the end of the journey with regard to putting asset management plans together. Certainly within the plans there are some key areas that have been identified where further work is required to further refine our investment within and the way in which we manage the delivery of our assets into the future. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the assets are only a tool to which we actually provide the services that council actually deliver. So the reality of it is that it's all around getting those assets in the right frame or right position to provide an appropriate level of service, and also to acknowledge that that level of services continue to be delivered and managed in a sustainable way. And sustainable means a lot of things to a lot of people, but at the end of the day, within these plans, it certainly provides the basis to which council can be provided with the information that's appropriate for the decision making into the future. Without saying much more, I'll hand it over to councillors if there are any further questions or comments required to be made.
Thank you, GM, and certainly there's been a lot of content there. Councillors, any questions for clarification?
Thank you, Mayor. And my question relates probably to the impact of a changing climate, and has that been applied across these asset classes?
Certainly within the plans themselves, it does make reference to the need to actually understand what climatic conditions may actually throw towards those assets down into the future. The reality of it is we are certainly guided by design standards as well that have certainly changed. I will certainly mention the Bridge Code more recently in the last 5 years had an update with regard to how you manage some of the flow velocities with regard to how you pin the bridges down and that sort of thing. So also with regard to how you manage urban drainage, around understanding with some of the learnings out of the 2011 and subsequent floods was around the need to understand that some of your systems will be overwhelmed or severely put it in a compromised state with additional debris blocking their ability to be appropriately utilised. So yes, we certainly keep abreast of specifications and standards, and yes, we also try to make best assumptions of what that may mean as far as added investment when a piece of infrastructure is looked at for upgrade. Also, we certainly look at appropriate material types that may actually be more resilient in events. So not only when we actually go to replace an asset, but we also look at the material that we use when actually maintaining a piece of infrastructure.
Thank you. Any further clarifications to the report? Councillor Swamborough, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is to the General Manager. Again, having distilled all these reports together over a long period of time and finally presenting the result, what would you consider from your viewpoint is the greatest challenge that we now have in managing these assets.
To wrap it up into one, greatest challenge is probably a hard task to answer at this point in time. I would say is managing the competing expectations of the users of these assets with the services in a way that we can actually sustainably provide the services that are associated with them. I don't sit here today and profess to say that by any means that's going to be easy, but at the end of the day, that's probably, I see, is one of the biggest challenges. And it's understanding that some of these assets are quite substantial in cost, not only to operate and maintain, but also to replace. So the reality of it is that, and probably our bridges are probably one of the bigger ones. You don't get a lot of length of road or transport infrastructure out of a bridge for the dollars invested. However, not having it there is not an option. We were back in 2008-9 when we had numerous timber bridges that restricted access to numerous properties and industry. It was not a good place to be in, and over 12, 15 years, we've got ourselves to a position where we're actually seeing some sort of light at the end of that. So, and that's come at a $4+ million investment over that period of time. I think the reality of it is it's around understanding the needs of the community and working through delivering it in a way that's acceptable and sustainable.
Further questions? Councillor McConnell, did you have a question? Right, thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Comments that can add value to the report? If not, we move forward. Can we table the recommendation? Introduce the recommendation, please.
Thank you, Mayor. The recommendation is that in accordance with Section 167 of the Local Government Regulations 2021, Council adopt the transport, urban drainage, building and facilities, and parks and open spaces asset management plans for infrastructure planning and management purposes, including future long-term financial plan considerations.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree that there. I've been made aware that the regulations should be 2012, not 2021. So I can repeat that that part of the recommendation is that with Section 167 of the Local Government Regulations 2012.
Thank you. I seek a mover. Councillor Enright. Any additional questions to this matter? Seek a seconder. Councillor McGuinness. Any further comments to this matter? If not, we'll turn to you. Councillor, you wish to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Mayor. I would. I share the excitement that Chris has at this stage. I think it's a very important milestone, and I think the final paragraph of the report is very relevant. And there's three main points in that. Critical to find the right balance between service levels and financial investment to ensure sustainability of service provisions in the long term while delivering services more efficiently and maximising external funding, I think are the very critical key points to this report and to the process from here to maintain our council's almost $1 billion worth of assets. And I commend the recommendation to you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak additionally? No, I will just echo the Councillor Enright's comments. The pleasing thing to me is the quality, the improvement in the quality of data to inform these plans has been a really big factor. Whilst that still needs further work in a number of the categories, in the major categories, it's certainly improved a lot. And that's important because that's been absent, that structure, discipline and system has been absent in the past. And that led to some of the examples that the GM alluded to, where we ended up with infrastructure that was no longer relevant and was holding back our economic performance. And the challenge for us from a strategic point of view is indeed to have well-informed understanding to inform our strategic focus for future investment. I think it highlights some of the comments in some of the summaries really highlight the challenges we have, such as the challenges particularly with our gravel road network, which are really highlighted as an area that needs to have a review of investment particularly. And I think this process of analysis actually gives us data, science and clarity to inform the way forward. And to try to get that balance between those challenges that we face for the future of getting sustainability both from an asset and financial point of view as we move forward. If there are no other wishing to speak, Councillor, you wish to close? Thank you. Then we put the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 10.4. And GM, thank you for joining us. Thanks. And thank you for your work. And we turn to the GM Council Sustainability to introduce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good morning, councillors, staff, and those listening in the digital public, those public listening digitally. First and foremost, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to make an announcement around the lateness of these, but I thought it was appropriate that these should be included into this report to assist the councillors as part of the draft 2021-22 budget process. So I do apologise that they are showing as a late item, but we thought that rather than wait until the next council meeting, that it was more appropriate to include these today. The first item there, 10.4, is the 2021 interim report to the Mayor from the external auditors. And as the report indicates, there is a requirement under the local government regulation to present this, the Auditor General's initial observation as part of the 2020-21 audit of our financial statements. I take the report as being read, but certainly happy to field any further clarifications as required. The main points, as indicated in the auditor's report, is that there's no new items that have come out initially. The initial process of the audit includes undertaking an audit of our controls, including purchasing, payroll, and all those miscellaneous types. The second part, as we progress into the closeout of the current financial year, will be to analyse the further aspects. It's pleasing to note that there's nothing has been identified as yet in this current process.
Thank you, GM. Councillors, questions? Councillor Enright, clarifications?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question to the General Manager. Of the number of matters reported in the prior years, 3 are marked resolved and 6 are work in progress. How are these work in progress matters progressing?
Thank you, Councillor, for that query. I would refer those to page 10 of 141 of the agenda. It includes there the prior year issues, and I can certainly address those as we go through. As you can see, item 18 IR-1, employees with excessive long service leave. That is a work in progress. We certainly, council's committed to providing every option available in order to allow staff with excessive leave balances to be able to take that leave. The risk to council is as you know, indicated in our monthly financial reporting, is the amount of the provision that council holds on its books for those and those other leave. So there is a number of programs, you know, in conjunction with people and strategy to try and identify some plans around addressing those. Policies under review. There's been some comprehensive work undertaken by council, and that's certainly in the eyes of the Audit and Risk Committee to address those. There's a new council be aware that a whole framework has been adopted recently to assist in evaluating those. These are part of a legacy systems. I will make comment that whilst they are overdue, there's nothing unlawful or anything that's you know, requiring immediate attention that they can't still be in place. A lot of our policies hinge on existing legislation, and as always, legislation generally trumps our policies if there are anything that's amiss. So we're working through those progressively, and the auditors will just be made aware of progress into that, as they are an attendee at our Audit and Risk Committee. So they're certainly aware of the situation. There's an interesting one there. It's resolved pending audit confirmation. Just the authorised signatories. I will make confirmation that as soon as the staff have left the organisation, we do provide notification to our bank. It's just the turnaround times for our bank to process that, and the auditors were made aware of that, including citing when the request was sent through to the bank. So that wasn't necessarily the fault of council, as we acted upon that as soon as we received it. The automated network alerts, the rest of these are a number of IT related matters that are certainly being progressed and look to be incorporated into the IST strategy. Another one there we've just successfully resolved today was a review of the asset management plan, so we can tick that one off. As you can see there, the expectation that it was to be adopted by council prior to 30th of June, so that was achieved. The other continuing legacy one is around purchase requisitions, and it's generally a favour of the the auditors is ensuring that whenever we engage suppliers, is that there should always be a purchase order prior. We have had situations where we get the invoice first and then the purchase order gets raised, and generally, you know, as per our procurement policies, we do require a purchase order to be raised to initiate the transaction. So we're certainly working on a number of measures to make sure that's maintained. That's the works in progress. So a lot of those will when the auditors do come back as part of their second session, we'll just make sure that those are being attended to and rectified accordingly.
Thank you. Any other clarifications, questions, councillors? Thank you. Then we'd ask you to introduce the recommendation, please, GM.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for 10.4, item 10.4, is that Council receive the Auditor General's interim observation report relating to the audit of Council's 2020-2021 financial statements.
Seek a mover. Councillor McConnell. Thank you. Any additional questions? Seek a seconder. Councillor Chalk. Additional points of discussion for that matter? If not, Councillor McConnell, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yeah, I think it's important that these reports do get out to the community to show that our governance within the within the council is meeting the expectations. So, thank you.
Councillor, anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak additionally? I will speak additionally then if no one else, just because it is a report to me. And I agree with Councillor McConnell's observation, support this, the recommendation, and also support that we are bringing this forward. There's always plenty of commentary from people making in various media channels making spurious allegations. So it is always comforting for me to have the proper, qualified, independent report that actually gives us confidence and allows us to share that confidence to the community, that we are having the right things done, that our officers are working to continue the path of improvement from some challenges of the past, and that involves changes of systems, changes of processes, and continued investment in that improvement path. And sometimes that's not visible to the public. However, it is essential that we continue that process of modernisation to meet what is a contemporary standard. And it is important, I agree with Councillor McConnell, it is important that we are able to give the evidence of that by a proper impartial voice to confirm what we communicate. And I was delighted to receive this report showing that confidence. We shall proceed. Councillor, did you wish to close out? Then we shall put the motion. Those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We move to item 10.5, page 15 of the late items report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Item 10.5 relates to the recently undertaken exercise of the March budget review. As contained within the report's comprehensive analysis of the movements, but I'll just make some, I'll take the report as being read, but just make some sort of general high-level commentary and certainly open for further clarification. As indicated, Council, the process of amending the budget is taken into account, as a result of changes in identified to forecast revenues and expenditures. Council adopted the original budget back in 6th of July 2020, and subsequently, a number of amendments have occurred throughout the year. It's anticipated that this March budget review will be the last for the financial year, and it certainly paves the way as a foundation for the draft 21-22 budget. The report indicates a number of minor changes to the operating and expenditure and some subsequent impacts to the capital. I guess the genesis of the report, the main items that I draw attention to, the changes for this will be around the council recently were notified of approval under the Department of Local Government's refinancing, loan refinancing program. And that was, to harness part of the, whilst this program generally exists, the state certainly made emphasis last year to as one of the raft of initiatives to counter the impacts that they foresaw with the with COVID. What this program meant was that council could capitalize or harness on the historically low interest rates and look to refinance some of our existing legacy loans. And some of these loans, as indicated previously, Mr. Mayor, I should make reference that this report was provided to council back in February to amend the debt policy. But I'll just recap on that, was to capitalise on historically low interest rates and apply the savings associated with our budgeted debt service payments to explore what options we had. And one of those options was the consideration to use that freed up cash to potentially leverage and look to apply for additional borrowings of 15 million. And as indicated in the report, that 15 million needed to take into account certain aspects when it came to funding potential capital projects. You know, there needed to be a derived benefit to the community and it, you know, in that to the overall potential gross regional, increase the gross regional product of the region, as well as explore opportunities for council in realising potentially additional revenue streams. So we received approval recently from the Department of Local Government that our borrowings that were contained in the normal budget of $1.5 million for the Lupton Street purchase, along with the $15 million in additional borrowings, and along with the refinancing consideration, had all been approved. And as such, those impacts were reflected in the into the budget, into the amended budget, as contained for consideration today by council. They're the major changes that we've reflected in the budget, Mr. Mayor. And I'm certainly now open the floor to provide clarity should there be further queries regarding the amended budget.
Councillor McConnell, do you wish to go first?
Yeah, thank you, GM. What is the difference between our pre-refinancing payments and our post-refinancing payments?
Currently on offer, and it should point out the difference between what we deem as the book value of our loans. The book value of our loans is just sitting under 31 million, but the market value of those loans is sitting at about 33 million. So the difference in those, there's a payment required, like any as we discussed previously at the debt policy update. If you were to pay out a loan early, you know, there'd be a similarly with other banks, there'd be a payment required to fix that. What's reflected in this budget, and it's actually favourable. Unfortunately, we hadn't reflected properly, but there's a difference payment of about $3.9 million that's indicated in the financial statements that we're required to in order to capitalise the early repayment and then lock those in at lower rates. We had to pay the difference between the book value and the market value. That's about 3.9 million, but the difference in the debt service payments is around $1 million.
Thank you.
Freed up in cash that then, when we explored the financial modelling, indicated that additional borrowings of $15 million were able to be facilitated with that cash without impacting our normal bottom line.
Thank you. And the servicing of the loan is over 20 years, and that rate does not change for that 20 years. So if it goes up in 10 years to 5-6%, it stays at 2% for that 20 years. Is that correct?
That's correct. Now council, unlike a lot of other banking institutions, you know, we source our money through Queensland Treasury corporations, and so there are some benefits that are afforded to local governments as compared to commercial borrowing facilities. But the maximum term that council, any local government, can borrow for is a maximum of 20 years, and that's correct that the fixed rate, the rate is fixed for the life of the loan. Now, if there are changes in circumstances and we're required to pay that out early, there will be additional costs. But generally, the loan is set for the 20 years, and for the refinancing of the $30 million, we've indicated a 20-year term for those with the fixed interest rate.
Thank you. Some of the loans that we did have before refinancing, what sort of rate percentage was on those?
They varied, some as high as a little over 7%. And certainly those loans are from from early days of the newly formed council, and they were towards the end of theirs. You know, there's probably a handful of years left in the end of those, and they varied from 7 down to 4 to 5%. So, capitalising on this initiative was a fiscal decision, and I think in given the opportunities that can be derived out of it, was certainly beneficial for council to consider.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McGuinness.
Yes, to the General Manager, I suppose I look on the budget, it's a budget, and people are inclined to look at the bottom line, and I see look at the operating result going from 1.4 in the budget to 6.2 of a loss, and you've explained somewhat the equity with the loans, though that going from 985 in equity back to 969. Would you like to give some more explanation on that so it's a bit more transparent to people, please?
Thank you, Councillor McGuinness. I guess I'll break that question down in a couple of parts. As you rightly stated, the change in the operating result is the initial upfront payment that council would have had to pay in order to pay those the difference of the loans between the book value and the market value. However, over the course of the duration of those loans over 20 years, the reduced debt service payments from those higher the loans at the higher interest rates negates. So there is over the life of the loans, there was a benefit to council to refinance. Now, one of the I guess prerequisites in council determining the applicable strategic projects to fund out of that $15 million is to consider the economic lens over some of these projects to see what can be derived to add value, not only just to council but also to the whole region as we continue to drive out of the impacts of COVID. So I guess the duration of over the duration of the 20 years, there's minimal sort of impacts associated with the refinancing. And I will add that there are a number of other loans that we have in a 10-year capital forecasts in those future years, as well as the 15 million. But certainly in the overall scheme of things, when council decides what to do with those, what projects to fund with that 15 million, there are consideration, and hopefully some of those may provide additional incremental positives on council finances. But at the moment, with the refinancing of the loans and the use of the $15 million, it's anticipated that there's minimal impacts to the bottom line.
Thank you. Anything, Councillor McGinn, any other questions? Councillor Enright.
Thank you, Mayor. And another question to the GM. Noting that we haven't selected projects, but just generally speaking, what are the opportunities and potential benefits that may come through this additional borrowings?
That's probably a bit hard to ask for me. I won't be the one that will decide which of the projects. It'll be the council, I guess. So we will provide you the necessary list of projects and apply unlike what we've done in the past, apply an economic development lens rather than the straight whole of life asset management factor on it. As one of the requirements from the department is to utilise the additional borrowings to fund those projects that will provide that capacity or that increased capacity for council, not just council, but the region itself to sort of prosper and add to the gross regional product. So there will certainly be an economist or economic development lens over those projects to allow the consideration and allow council to make an informed decision as which projects meet the mould or meet the fold to potentially consider funding out of that bucket.
GM, a further question to that. Just a bit more clarity. The reason this opportunity was presented for local governments, would you elaborate a bit more on that just to give that clarity?
Yes, I guess, Mr. Mayor, the program has always been there with QTC to look to to refinance loans and whether or not there was capacity. I guess taking into account where interest rates have gone, there probably wasn't much take up in the past, but given the interest rates of our legacy loans and the low interest rates currently on offer, and again, I don't want to divulge too much into what the commercial rates are, but they're certainly different to what council can avail of through Queensland Treasury Corporation. The Queensland government really highlighted that particular program to local governments, looking to part of a stimulus as the to try and drive out of the impacts associated with the COVID pandemic. And it's about the realise or freeing up some capital in those debt service payments to look at additional borrowings to then look at some strategic projects to keep keep stimulating the economy through the building process, as well as and then realise the potential for those projects to add to the overall gross regional product of the region.
Thank you. Further question. Whilst the 15 million has to come into our accounts before the end of this financial year, that will be, my understanding is, and the clarity perhaps just for the understanding of this report as it goes public, is that we have not made those recommendations yet, and the decisions about how that is expensed will be into the next financial year. Mm-hmm. So it will carry forward.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. I guess a recap on how the borrowing programs work within local government is that when council adopts a budget at the start of the financial year and has indicative loan borrowings to supplement the revenue streams of council for particular capital projects, the Department of Local Government provides a process whereby council submits their debt policy that indicates the intended borrowings for that financial year, along with an application consisting of council's long-term financial forecast. That's then assessed by by QTC on behalf of the department. Once notification of approved borrowings has been provided, it is then required to draw down prior to the 30th of June of that financial year. However, the funds will then be expended accordingly once the projects are identified. For this particular one, the $15 million will be drawn down by council by the 30th of June 2021. The funds, the $15 million, will remain restricted, only to be utilised for those identified projects. And those identified projects, as we mentioned before, we're currently working on those and providing the economic lens on them for those to be brought back to council. Once project have been identified, those funds could then be certainly drawn upon to commence the project, and the repayment will be over the 20 years.
Thank you. Clarified that. Can we introduce your further questions? Anybody further clarifications?
Yeah.
Councillor Swamborough.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I just want to go to the budget review, capital budget review amendments in there, and I was wondering if we could ask a few questions about this section of the report.
Councillor, clarifications. Go. That's what we're here for.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess there's some big numbers in here in relation to the transfer of money around between our capital programs, and I do understand that budgeting isn't an exact science, and you're always going to get some of these adjustments. The main one that adjustment in here that concerns me is in relation to council's reseals program. Reseals, of course, are a very important part of asset management, and it is about really, channeling renewable money into your assets to fund the depreciation of those assets. And with our reseals program, we started off for the year indicating that we were going to spend, I think, about $3.2 million on that. Now we've reduced it to 3.1 million. Now we've reduced it to 2.7, and we've transferred 429,000 out of that to the Beachmont Road project. And I was just wondering if the General Manager just can explain to me, you know, what implications that will have for our reseal program and for our road network if we're not putting the renewal money back into that asset that we originally planned.
Thank you for the question. I can certainly answer that in two parts. We're finding with our reseal program, and I won't go into huge elaboration today, that about half of our program is in pavement repairs to actually and restoration of table drains and shoulders so that the water flows appropriately off the road. In some instances, we find isolated section of road that may need an additional investment in money before the seal can go on. In this case, Beachmont Road was significant enough that we found that to actually get appropriate connectivity between projects that have been delivered as well as the reseal, enable the reseal program to continue, that was an appropriate investment. Thankfully, this year we've seen as a result of COVID, you would have realised fuel prices dropped. Thankfully, we saw quite a considerable drop in bitumen prices, so we're able to deliver or be able to see some flow-on savings with regard to that, and that has continued with the rates that we've been able to achieve. You're quite right within the fact that reseals are very important part. It's actually keeping the roof on the house, that is the pavement underneath, that supports the traffic as it traverses the network. So that's a very high level brief explanation to that. So we haven't seen a huge decrease in dollars, but we have seen some decrease, but we're still able to achieve a very similar scope to what was originally proposed to be delivered under that program.
Thanks for that clarification. Do you have a further clarification?
Yeah, my next question, just in relation to Lake Mugara Caravan Park, there's an $80,000 transfer to prop up that particular project, additional funding. Is that going to be enough to complete that work, or are you expecting other problems with that project?
As you may or may not be aware, also we're finding that within anywhere where you're doing any building works, there are some considerable issues with regard to getting materials, as well as some of the actual skilled workforce that are in demand as a result of the works that are going on. When we've put these projects together, we use the best quantity surveyor information we have at the time. In this particular case, we also added an additional 20+% on top of what were the estimates that we saw, and we are currently in negotiations, which I can't elaborate on, with regard to the final completion of this particular project. So it is likely that there may be additional costs or slight scope adjustments required to meet what is the dollars allocated to this project. So in that particular case, the $80,000 was a form part of a transfer to cover some of the already realised increased costs with the electrical works that are required to make the site more compliant.
Thank you. Any other clarifications, councillors? Not? Yep. Sorry, Councillor Swanborough.
Yes, one more question on that. In relation to Christmas Creek Road, we budgeted 1.2 million, I think, and we've come under by $200,000 in completing that job. I just wonder if you could explain, you know, how that came about.
There are a couple of things. Quite in this particular case, I think one of the big issues that was realised for this project was limited wet weather during the time, as you may recall, towards the latter part of last calendar year. It was considerably dry, moving right through into almost February from memory, and that did actually didn't see any delays in delivery or rework, or any combined issues with once you dig down below your gravel pavement and start shaping your earthworks. If you get rain at the wrong time, that can add costs and delay quite substantially. So in each project, we do have an element of I won't go into what my former boss used to call it, but it's an element of dollars that you allocate, because most of your bigger projects you have some form of delay. In this particular one we didn't. That combined with from time to time you actually get reasonable rates on all of your supply of materials. So without going into the finite detail, I think that the majority of the savings were as a result of the favourable conditions in which the crew were able to construct the job.
Thank you. Okay. No further clarifications, councillors. We ask the GM to introduce the recommendation, please.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I'll have to read off the board. My computer just blanked out. The recommendation for 10.5 is that pursuant to sections 169 and 170 of the Local Government Regulation 2012, Council adopt the amended budget for 2020-2021 financial year as tabled, incorporating A, Statement of Comprehensive Income, B, Statement of Financial Position, C, Statement of Cash Flows, D, Statement of Changes in Equity, and E, Measures of Financial Sustainability.
Seek a mover. Councillor Chalk. Any additional questions? Seek a seconder. Councillor West. Any additional items of relevant discussion to this? Not. You wish to speak? Councillor Chalk. Anyone wishing to speak against? Wishing to speak additionally? Oh, Councillor Swamborough.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to say I appreciate the fact that our March budget review, albeit a little bit late towards the end of the financial year, is here in front of us, and whilst it was a late item, at least it's being discussed in open council, and for that I think council should be commended.
Thank you, Councillor. I would just speak also and note that I'm supportive of this, although this is always discussed in open council, so I'm not sure of the relevance. But anyway, it is good. It's in the time cycle that we normally deal with these matters. It's exciting. I think as you look as the years unfolded, for me, the excitement in this report is that it highlights that whilst we budgeted quite conservatively in some areas, because of the COVID impacts, there have been significant inflows of grants of various forms that have allowed us to deliver substantially beyond what our small financial base could otherwise have allowed, and that's brought great benefit. And we need to continue to stretch every dollar, and the adjustments in the year as unfolded has highlighted the success with that approach. And I thank the GM, also thank the CEO and his team for their diligence in pursuing those opportunities and in bringing good fiscal disciplines to bear, and that's what's evidenced through this report. Close the item. We now put the motion. Those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We have one more item, so we will continue. Item 10.6, GM, again, we're in your hands.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 10.6 is the Auditor General's report to Parliament, report to Parliament around local government 2020. This report, as we've indicated before, we've got the interim report for 2021, but this report to Parliament was for the financial year 2019-20. And the report is very detailed in the outcomes of that report. But similarly, I share the sentiments of the GM when talking about the asset management plans. You know, it's with great pleasure to provide this report, given the outcome of the report and reflective of the council's controls and ability to manage finances and be rated as a low likelihood of financial perils. Unless, Mr. Mayor, you want me to go through those in detail, because I can certainly take any clarifications as required. But high level, I guess the report is you know, being self-centered and focusing on Scenic Rim. It does provide some a great deal of positives, and certainly highlights the controls and mechanisms that we have in place, you know, around governance, policy, structure, and the like, to ensure that you know, our controls and our ability to manage risk is functioning well given the circumstances. It also highlights the fact that of the financial sustainability indicators that all 77 councils within Queensland are judged upon, we score quite well, or we're rated quite well in those metrics.
So any questions for clarification, councillors? We'll introduce the recommendation, GM.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The recommendation for 10.6 is that council receive the Auditor General's local government 2020 report.
Seek a mover. Councillor West. Any additional questions? Seek a seconder. Councillor McGuinness. Any additional discussion to add to this topic? If not, Councillor West, do you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. Just to mention, this is a very lengthy document. But certainly it's good that it's been made available. And I guess the main message, although we don't like to compare ourselves too much with other councils, but the main message for Scenic Rim and for our residents is that we were rated as a low risk overall with financial sustainability. So that's very pleasing.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to speak against? Anyone wishing to speak additionally to the motion? I will just take the liberty to speak briefly and highlight that part of the realisation that this report re-emphasises is that it has taken some really hard strategic focus over a number of years, and a couple of the prior councils, particularly since amalgamation, it's taken some very hard decisions and some very strong strategic focus to get the balance right, to be a council that's not at that vulnerable place. And that's the challenge for us to continue. I think the report shows that when that focus is lost, councils slip into high risk status. And this council was in that status in the past, and some of the councillors here will recall they were part of that. And we're now in a strong position. We need to ensure that we continue to have proper strategic focus on our revenues and investment and service levels, etc., to get, as we talked earlier, the balance right, to ensure we maintain that proper financial position for the future. Any wish to close, Council? No. We then motion before us. We put the motion. Those in favour? That is carried unanimously. CEO, there are no other items before the meeting today. Thank you to those in the digital gallery for joining us today. Thank you, councillors. Thank you, executive. I now declare the meeting closed.
Okay.